Well, team, it's really good to be here. Thanks everybody for joining. The SLT and Paul have given me 15 minutes to take you through a year's worth of information. So thank you for setting me up for success, team. Joking aside, before I jump into the content, there's a few people I'd be remiss if I didn't start with a thank you because none of this would have been possible. So I just want to give a quick shout out to Allie Brown in our supply chain L&D, Kate Perenboom from our global talent organization, Casey Cervanka, who leads change for us here in the supply chain, Tiffany Sheff, who's leading HR transformation for us. And then you're going to get to know Andy, Claire, and Tom from the Developmental Edge and John Fooder Connect, who from Aspira Leadership, who have been our guides, our shepherds, and our partners in everything that I'm going to share with you. And so before we flip to the next page, I just wanted to say that this is not my story. This is not Paul's story about, kind of the next greatest team effectiveness, approach that we could be taking. But this is really decades of research on executives and executive teams, and frankly, out of Harvard on just minds and mindsets and people's immunity to making adjustments on things that have really worked for them in the past, even in situations when they really need to transform their thinking and work in a different way. And so this is really our story, and it's really our way. So it's my pleasure to take you through what we've been doing together. So Hillary, if you go to the next slide for me. Here is the year on a page, and so I'm actually going to do a double click into each one of the phases that you see here. And in the US, we have a saying, it's called that we are building a bike while we're on it. What that really means is we're not entirely sure what kind of bike we're building or if we're even on a bike. And that would definitely have been true as we started phase one with John Fooder Connect. And so as we moved on into the later phases, I'm going to give you another analogy that Andy actually just gave to me this week, which is another bike analogy, mind you, that when you're balancing on a bike and it's not in motion, it's very, very hard to stay upright. But if you just start to pedal, that balance starts to even out. And so this is really the story of us learning to ride bikes together. So if we go to the next page, a year ago in a conference room here in Minneapolis, the people in that beautiful bubble chart gathered with John Fooder Connect. And I would tell you, we probably all just kind of walked into that room without a whole bunch of expectations. And what John shared with us was some really important foundational work around ourselves. So we called them kind of personality drivers. You see them there at the bottom of the page. And they're just a number of kind of common areas that we did a fairly scrappy assessment of ourselves in terms of being low, medium, or high on, both to get to know ourselves a little bit better, but also then to put them together to say, okay, hey, on any one of these particular dimensions, as a team, it's going to be important that you have some awareness that you're really high in interpersonal connectivity and really high in emotional expression. So those two combined are going to likely produce some pretty emotionally felt discussions as you're going through kind of productive discourse, etc. But you're going to get through them because you care deeply that we get through them and that everybody feels like their voice has been heard and called out. Combinations like that as it related to the team. We also talked about the difference between what we're calling an all-in team and a high-functioning team. So what I would say is at General Mills, most of us have had the pleasure of working on some really exceptional teams. In fact, you've probably been in some form of team effectiveness meeting where we have recalled one of those teams and what the characteristics were, because it often comes back to the things that you see on the right-hand side of the page: creating trust, maintaining connectivity, etc. And so why is it that we really well smart intended leaders and really well intended smart teams don't always achieve kind of that greatness? We are referring to that greatness again in analogy form of a Stanley Cup team. So in the US, you have the National Hockey League. every single one of the team has a great coach. Every single one of the teams have great individual players. They all work really, really hard. It's all with the goal of winning the Stanley Cup, but only one team wins. What is the difference between those teams? And really what we started to learn was there is a completely different level of creating trust and a completely different level of maintaining connectivity and really contributing to each other's work and each other's development. So if we click to the next slide, Hillary, we got kind of the grounding with John Footer Connect. And then I've titled this, Andy's very big into titling different chapters of the work that we're doing together as Boston in December. And it's fairly applicable to probably kind of how it felt. We show up in Boston, we're there to meet with a couple of Harvard professors, Robert Keegan, Lisa Leahy, and then the Developmental Edge team, Andy Fleming and Claire Lee. And Bob Keegan spent the first day really taking us through some really important developmental research. You may or may not be aware, but for the majority of history, we believed that human development, adult development, ended at the same time you stopped growing in height. And this was just largely accepted. That didn't make sense to Bob Keegan and some other professors at Harvard as being true. And initially, it was really thought that, well, maybe some of these individuals just were better at using kind of what they had. But it turns out that isn't true. And in fact, Bob Keegan and his team are now considered the absolute world experts in adult development, human development. And what they said is, at any age, literally up until the day we die, we have the capacity to learn and the capacity to grow. But why, why do we stop doing that? And in some ways, it's because we become cultured, we become what they called of a socialized mindset. And there's a lot of really good things. In fact, I would say many of us or all of us on the call use some of the things that we've developed as ways of working, as ways of interacting with people that are really, really helpful. And as a supply chain leadership team, we know that we have got to partner with all of you in our entire supply chain organization to transform aspects of what we're doing. Well, that isn't just optimizing, kind of what is today. That is really having some not only breakthrough thinking on specific things, but the breakthrough thinking on the specific hows. And really what happened in Boston was this shift of, okay, we believe that there is more for us to learn and do. We believe collectively that there's more for us to do and grow. And then they introduced this concept of why that might be hard and how we might get there together. So the concept of why that might be hard, you're going to hear about as the immunity to change. And I'm going to give you a really, really quick example. So the first immunity to change map that I built personally was related to getting out of my team's work. Why? Because I needed more time to do some of my own work. So the first column of, kind of what I wrote in was I need to get further out of my team's work. Second column was what I was doing or not doing, not what I should do, but what I am doing that makes that the case. I'm attending some meetings that I probably don't need to be in. I'm probably sharing more than I need to when a team member comes to me with a problem. The third column was around my worries. Well, why might I be doing that? Like what might I be worried about? So simplistically, maybe I'm worried that how would my team know that I'm adding any value if I'm not attending those meetings or I'm not helping their work get better? Which turns into commitment statements or specifically double negatives. So I am committed to never, kind of looking at or having my team think that I'm not adding any value. Well, behind all of that are some assumptions. And that assumption was really my team will decide, or judge that I am not adding value if I don't go to these meetings or I don't, kind of fully answer to all of my capacity, a question that they bring to me. So then we get into these experiments. And if you've heard the word experiment, your leadership team leader might be sharing that we're working on these, but they're safe experiments around how could I test if that assumption is really true. And so for me, it was literally going back to my calendar and taking myself out of a handful of meetings that I thought I was a suspect, if you will, curious about whether or not I really needed to be there. And guess what? I did it. And or there were mechanisms for me to get that information without spending the time there. And so that is kind of the individual aspect of the immunity to change. The team aspect of immunity to change is twofold. One is a really, really important concept of development as a team sport. And so again, we can ask our team members, our direct report team members, as well as Paul, as well as each other for feedback. But this is different. This is going up further into the creation of the thinking, the work, upwards in the funnel on areas and topics that might not be as obvious that you would welcome your teammates at the SLT level together into to help shape your decisions. I think, or you're thinking about it in the past, it's like, well, I'm in charge of make. I'm in charge of sourcing. I am in charge of supply chain. Like, isn't what's expected of me to just come up with the best plan I can in partnership with my direct reports, and then we're going to execute it with our organization? The short answer is kinda. If you are, kind of again in more of that optimization of what is, but as you move into the transformation, it's really about welcoming each other into spaces of curiosity, learning, and growth so that collectively we can think about what's next, what's transformational, and how are we going to get there together. So the bottom of this page is really a picture of us deep in, okay, we're in Boston in December. We're hearing all of this. It's pretty hard to argue with. We're listening to the world expert, and this sounds kind of hard. So they sent us off from Boston with commitments on both individual and team experiments. And Hillary, if you click to the next slide, we also committed to getting back together as a team in February, January. My gosh, the last 2 weeks, team, has gone very fast. So we fairly recently just got back together, and we had both John, our executive coach, and the developmental edge together. And this is really where we would talk about the magic coming together. So John has years and years of experiences in the business setting with individual executives as well as executive teams who have tried really, really hard to achieve this kind of Stanley Cup level of individual and collective performance. That's what I refer to as the rainbow chart. And what's really interesting, it's kind of that orange, blue, yellow, red, green chart at the top. None of those things are going to seem complicated. Self-awareness, your mindset, trust, collaboration skills, meeting effectiveness. I mean, meeting effectiveness needs to show up on a page for, executives and executive teams. It sure does. And so what we did is we took this concept of these developmental sprints, the mindsets that we need to have, and we coupled it with John's work related to how we show up. And we've done a fairly deep dive as a team now in terms of on those dimensions of trust and connectivity. How would we rate ourselves in terms of bringing that to life and in action? And then on the basis of that combined set of information, what are the next kind of sets of work and experimentation that we want to do that are going to help us be those even stronger leaders and even stronger team that we want to be? For fun, we went to the movies together, which is the picture that you see at the bottom of the page. If you haven't seen the movie The Boys in the Boat, it is a representation that Hollywood did just for this team to talk about, I'm joking, to talk about, this concept of being all in. But joking aside, an 8-man rowing boat is an absolute great analogy for what we're trying to do, because you are individually responsible. You might be in the engine room, you might be one of the people who is steering the boat, kind of, et cetera. But collectively, we are ultimately going to move and win together. And so we have spent time talking about this, really thinking about this. And then with that combined information from John and the developmental edge around where do we still have opportunities, we have now set up our next set of developmental sprints. And again, if you've heard about this, you're starting to see us cascade this into our leading edge. So if you flip to the next slide, Hillary, here we are, phase 4. So this is our continued work as a team that frankly will probably never be done, because if we're doing this right, we're just continuously trying to build each other and ourselves in terms of our leadership, and to be operating even more all in. And so you see here on the page that we said that to be the best supply chain in the world, we need to accelerate and scale our developmental intelligence. Our developmental intelligence is what I have just been talking about in terms of our ability to grow and learn ourselves. So developmental intelligence is a new leadership capability that we as a supply chain leadership team believe that we absolutely must have over the course of the next 10 years or more here in the supply chain, and that we'll build together. And so today is just really an introduction to what has your SLT been up to? Why are you starting to hear this all in or experimentation language, and how might you start to become a part of your leader in the SLT's kind of journey? And then how can we bring you into that? And so know that we are in the process right now of designing what that will look like and how we will bring that cascade to life. But today we wanted to bring it to you to do an introduction, my rapid fire 15 minutes on what we've been up to the last year. And then I'm going to turn things over right now to Hillary, who is going to start a panel discussion with our senior leaders on what this experience has been like for them. So over to you, Hillary. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Allison. So with that backdrop of an overview of what we've been experiencing over the last year, we thought it might be helpful to hear from the team. And actually, there's nothing scripted here besides really getting the real, like what did the team really think about this experience, and just to hear a few stories from them. So with that, we'll get started. Okay, so Rob, we're going to start with you. What was your real expectation going in, and how was your actual experience? And be honest.
Katie's already smiling at me. She's worried what's going to come out of my mouth. I don't even know that expectation is the right word, if I'm honest. I think the way Allison described phase 1, I just thought that was kind of a one-off exercise. I didn't know it was going to go any further than that. And then when I saw the invite for Boston, I mean, the first thought was, holy crap, are we really going to spend 2 days doing some sort of team building exercise? How did Paul ever let Allison talk him into this? What are we doing? Now, at least it was in Boston, so it was a quick drive for Michael and I, so that was helpful. But I will say, as skeptical as I may have been going in, I actually enjoyed it. I think the words I used coming out of it a couple times with my cohort was kind of therapeutic. I think it felt good to finally have conversations in a different way that we were not having, I think, as a group. And we all left, I just think, with a better understanding of how we're wired and why we do what we do, why we say what we say, and the things that either we're afraid of that drive us and or things that motivate us. So I think we had a much better understanding. And then by the time we got to what she's calling phase 3, I mean, everything just felt very natural and easy. So look, I've only been here, a little less than a year and a half. So it was kind of nice to start a journey with folks that have been here forever. So it didn't really make a difference what your tenure was. So I think that was helpful for me. Otherwise, I don't know if they would have gotten a chance to know me the same way they know everybody else. So I enjoyed it. It was helpful. And, the key is I can see it in the interactions. Within 2 days of Boston, I can remember Phil and my team sent a note that I know he thought was going to be met with resistance. And the response came back, and he and I hadn't caught up. And we caught up after Boston, and he was like, oh, my God, I can't believe, that so-and-so responded that way. Katie. And I said, I got to be honest, Phil. I said, I got to be honest. I really think it was Boston. I think it was because of the work that we did in Boston. So it's already taking hold. So, look, it's easy for us to say because we've gone through it. I know it may not resonate with the broader team who hasn't gone through it, but I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. We are a much different group of people today than we were a year ago. Not even a question.
Awesome. Courtney, how about you?
All right, I don't know if you teamed us together purposely, but I'll be honest, I was kind of annoyed, and I remember complaining because I was like, it's December, I'm busy, and we got to travel, and we just did a team building, and so I went in with probably like negative to low expectations, so I was probably a little bit more funky about it. But I would say, I've been around almost 20 years, and I've been to a lot of trainings and development, and I did go in with like pretty low because I was like, okay, we did this before, like Rob. I didn't know this was like a continuation, so I was a little confused by that. But I think to Rob's point, I got to know people at my table that I thought I knew, or and I think we share things about ourselves that I don't think I would ever share at work quite. And I'm pretty open with everything. So I think that was good. And then Rob was part of one of my experiments, and like me and him got to know each other a lot better. And I think it's really, like I said, I think I went in with like, I'm not sure how this is gonna go. And I had the fear of, as many of us have done, we're all in it in the training or in the session, and we go back to work and everything is the same. And I would say that's probably the biggest differentiator to me is I've seen us, whether we like to or not, we are using it in our day-to-day. We have the formal check-ins that require us to really think about how we're doing it. And now I see us all speaking the similar language. Hillary used it the other day in a chat about being all in. So I do think it helps us have a great level set and expectation of how we should work together.
Fantastic. Thank you, Courtney. And actually, that's the perfect lead in, Katie, to the next question for you is, so we keep talking about all in. Maybe some of our teams have heard us talk about all in. What does it actually mean to you after going through this experience? And as our teams look to the SLT, should they expect to see a difference or feel a difference? And what's your thought on that?
Yeah, so this is, again, going back to like a year ago, and this concept of all in. I think at the surface level, we're like, yeah, I get it. I'm here, I'm on the team, I'm all in. But going through this reflection and really thinking about where have you been a part of a really super high functioning team? Because we have all been a part of one at some point in our career, maybe more than one. But it almost felt like it happened by chance, or maybe there was like this extreme situation that brought everybody together. And I think what's different about this is it's being really purposeful. We talk about team collaboration and things like this, but this is really thinking about if you want to have this best in class team, the entire team has to be all in, and it can't just be one person. And are you actually leaning into that? Are you, your success, like I'm only going to be successful if Rob is highly successful, if Michael is, if Chad is, if Nisar is, if everybody on this team is. And so the difference is on all in, it's not just like you're participating and you're collaborating, you're actually leaning in to ensure they're successful through their development and through some of these experiments we're running. So I think that has been different. It's been a much more thoughtful approach, and building off of what Courtney and Rob said, it goes a little bit deeper too. Getting to know people at a different level and really understanding what drives them. And what that should lead to, I hope you do see, is higher trust. And when there's higher trust, there's more collaboration. I mean, just so many things start to happen and build off of that. So I hope that's what people start to see with this team, is not just the General Mills because we're nice and so we get along with each other, but truly leaning in and helping each other out and having different conversations and then making bigger things happen because of that.
Thank you, Katie. Michael, what about you?
What was the question again, Hillary?
No.
I'm joking. Going in, I probably had a similar sort of feeling as a lot of my colleagues. Like, we are such a high performing team, and as Paul opened this discussion with business performance and our contribution to business performance, I was going, it's just fabulous to be part of such a high performing team. And our coaches taught us about the continuum that teams go through from dysfunctional, functional, highly functional to truly transformational. And I said, well, look at our performance the last 2 years. Like, really, we are like truly highly functional as a group. And I think we are, but with an aspiration to be truly transformational. And that's what All In for me is. That's where it connects. And there's been so many benefits, and it's only a year, as Alison said. It's pretty new. These things take a lot of time, right? So, and in my 30 years, I've been involved in all the way from dysfunctional to very rarely transformational. Actually, it is a space that's hard to get to. But I must say that the things that I'm getting out of it, I spent 6 hours road tripping with Rob, and Rob, I'm only a year ahead of you, but it's great to get to know you in a personal space. Becky and I spend a lot of time, like just the 3 pillar leads, like together. Obviously spent a lot of time as a group as well, getting to know each other, which is really important because we're a pretty new Stanley Cup team, right? So the recent draft brought new players in. There's new people in seats, so we're still sort of forming the plays together. So really, I think we're on a really good curve, trying to get to that transformational aspiration, right? So for me, it's about trusting myself, trusting each other, having each other's back. The connectivity point that Alison made. So for me, not in my silo, it's about understanding what's going on in Nisar's life. And Nisar, you shared a wonderful service update recently for this group. I think that's, for me, really impactful as an example. Becky, you did the same recently with your capital strategy. I find that really helpful from my seat. But that connectivity is really powerful in a high performing all-in team. And contributing, the last part I'll leave you with is really genuinely contributing to each other's success and growth is a big part of an all-in team. And what should our team see differently? Maybe a lot more vulnerability. Maybe we ask for help a bit more. Maybe we just wear it on our sleeves a bit more. And that is all part of the journey we're on with, as I say, that aspiration to try and get from that high functional space that we're in to really truly breaking through to transformational leadership. So I really appreciate the journey, and I'm certainly all in.
Thank you, Michael. Michael to Mike. So I'll go to you next, Mike. So the question for you, and I think we heard references to this in the earlier answers of, we've all been a part of team effectiveness before. And probably many of us have loved it, gone back to our desk, maybe remembered it for a couple of days and moved on. But for you, was this different? Did this feel different, and why?
Thanks for asking, Hillary. And yeah, it does feel different. And candidly, it's been tough to turn off. And so if I were to characterize like what is different, the breadth, number one, this is deep theory that we were learning from renowned experts in the morning and then starting to practice in the afternoon. For health's sake, we were developing new neural pathways. That's a lot to bite off in a day. The pace, I mean, it had to become just taking a step and then seeing where it goes. And you had to get to uncomfortable fast. And you may say, why? If I heard on the first day is Bob started us with, who are you and how can you cope? And really what we're focused on in these sessions is who can you become and how can you make a difference? That's quite a mindset shift. And then the other thing, Hillary, I would say that really forced us to jar and reconsider is that change is not necessarily about adjusting behaviors, but rather challenging assumptions. And that forces a pretty deep connection, both at an individual and a team level, between your personal life and your professional life. And you got to get vulnerable pretty fast, whether you like it or not, in order to really get to some of the things that drive why you do what you do. So that has required a lot of in the meeting reflection, and I would say a lot of personal time reflection as well. I've never been anything like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nisar, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the folks covered it on here, but I think there are 2 things for me. One, I've done years of Myers-Briggs, and I can tell you what my letters are. But the personality drivers actually, I think, brought a different lens of how I understood myself. and give my folks I work with an opportunity to understand me differently. So for anyone that's ever read an email or a Teams note from me at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and you're like, what the heck did he say? Low accuracy is probably kind of one of my traits. And so maybe that helps explain like the missing words in the grammar. But kidding aside, once you guys see the framework, there and the immunity to change, there's a box in there that's called the worry box. And I've always, either business-wise or from a personal perspective, there have been things that I have worried about that subconsciously probably locked me up in a box a little bit more than I am. And as I talked about those in this group, and they were business worries and then even some vulnerable personal worries, it felt good to actually have a forum where I could come out and like talk about that stuff. And the reaction was amazing. Within an hour after our session was done on Wednesday, Michael had reached out on Teams and said, hey, I heard you. Here's my point of view on the worry that you think you have. And that meant the world to me. And so as I started getting feedback from others like Becky and Katie and Courtney, like it actually boosted my confidence and kind of helped me get over my own mental hurdles. And I've seen in the time of the last week or a month and a half, I've become even more boundaryless than I ever have been. So within, the work and the way I show up, the way I'm showing up for my team, and even Paul's team, I truly feel like I've transformed myself. And I don't think I would have seen that or felt that with trainings of the past where, yeah, cool, I'm an E. Well, yeah, all right, well, I'm an E. But so I think this framework has been just, at least for me, transformational.
Thank you, Nisar. Chad, if you could add some color and context to this as well. We've heard a couple people reference how this has kind of stepped into the personal side of their lives as well. Have you seen that as you think about this particular team effectiveness?
Yeah, for sure I have. I think what makes this a little bit different is I think we've all probably been to a lot of trainings over time, and many have said the same thing, and you get some really incredible insights, deep insights. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to put this into practice right now, and then the tyranny of the urgent happens, and and what typically comes along with that is our default behavior sort of reemerge, and then all the things that we learned and these little synapses that began to be formed are like quickly obliterated, and we go about our lives. Allison said this, what's really important is one, it's hard to balance a bike when it's not in motion, and so it is easier to develop yourself when your bike is in motion. And how we are in motion in the workplace is working problems with a team, etc. And when we can bring in some persistence and practice to these concepts over a long arc of time, we stand the best chance of actually being effective. And we have not just had the sessions that Allison talked about and that others have talked about in Boston and then together, a couple of weeks ago. There have been frequent check-ins with, some of the instructors and moderators, so much so that sometimes I look at my calendar, I'm like, oh my God, I've got another call with Andy. He's gonna shame me into what have you practiced, what experiments have you run, et cetera. And so it keeps us focused on learning and growing together. And I think, it makes a difference in the workplace. It makes a difference out of the workplace. If I am a better leader because I am vulnerable with my peers and I'm getting feedback from them as I go about my work under stress, trying to do big things, guess what? I also get to be a better dad. I get to be a better partner to my wife. I get to be a better community member, because those same things of trying to do good under stress, things don't go well, and the ability to sort of break that down. Why is that? How am I showing up for other people? Those are lessons that kind of are applicable in all parts of our lives.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chad. Okay, so I think throughout this first 48 minutes, we've heard a lot about references to experiments. And I think Allison gave a little color to her experiment or what she experienced there. Becky, can you start? What's an example of one of your experiments that you could share?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you Andy. Let me go back to Allison. So Andy is really big on titles, and when we had to share our experiment, he made us all give a title to it. So think like a book. So I will give you my title, then I'll explain my experiment. So my title for my experiment is Mom, We Need Your 1%. And for anyone that has children and teenagers, you know that it's one, they're very candid, so you'll get feedback every single day. Two, it's really important for us to be there and present. And so my experiment is where we were working through this, with my daughter, and really she gave me feedback this summer that said, Mom, we literally get like 1% of your brain when you're home because, you're thinking about other things, you come home and you're not here. And so that summer I said, okay, I'll try to be more present. Well, fast forward to this experiment, and what you've heard the team talk about is being part of a really great team, and being able to enjoy that requires investment. This is not something that just because we all report to Paul that is going to happen by proximity and osmosis. And as I took a look at my own team, it's the same. And so it takes work, it takes intentionality, and it takes collaboration and really everybody being all in. And so my initial experiment was, I really want to be able to build an incredibly high effective senior team. It's important to me. I feel like I'm at my best. It makes work more fun. And so working with the Development Edge, I was working with Claire, who is Andy's wife, and she went through and we actually ended up getting to, in order to develop a great team, I first have to be present in the moment, present in the conversation. And so where we came down, and so my experiment's actually really simple, where Claire and I came in and we said, okay, I want to be present. And so we said, for one-on-ones and in meetings, I'm going to close absolutely everything out, and I'm only going to focus on this. And she said, okay, so do this in your next meeting. So I happened to have Martha later that week. And so I said, okay, well, we'll do it for 30 minutes. She said, don't even start with 30. So she had really low expectations for me. She's like, just do 5 minutes. And so we go in and I do 5 minutes, and 5 minutes ended up being 10, ended up being 20. Team, I can tell you, it was so much more effective to have the one-on-one dedicated time. I have found, now I've been doing this for about, I'd say 6 to 7 weeks. I have more time. I remember things more, I'm more engaged, and I find that I actually am able to get more done during the week when I don't multitask, but it really requires shutting everything down. And when I go in there, I have a notebook, so I will show this to you. I write down what I'm worried about or ruminating on before I go into different meetings, and I park it to the side. I look at the end of the day, and it allows me then to focus on what I'm doing there. It's been hugely impactful. Now I'm only 6 weeks in, but what I will tell you is just start with something small, something 5. Now, I also had a personal, so Mike touched on this, you can't really separate personal and professional. So given the feedback that I got from my daughter about, hey mom, we need your 1%, I said, okay guys, we're gonna do this. And so I dedicated an hour where I put away my phone, and that was met with marginal sense. Anyone that has teenagers, you'll understand this. So I show up in their back room, and I'm like, all right guys, I'm here. And so they're looking, and they look up at me like this. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, I'm here for our time together. I put my phone away, we get an hour. And so they were like, Mom, we don't actually want you for an hour. Let's start with 20 minutes and then let's go from there. So when I think through this, but overall, it's been really good to have dedicated time and continuing to learn. I'm not perfect, but it has been hugely impactful for me.
I love that. Hopefully you're up to 30 minutes now instead of the 20 minutes with your kids, Becky.
I'd say, we have to do intervals. So interval training with them. So, it's like you get a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. So if anybody has any tips on teenage daughters, I'll take them.
Chip, how about you?
Yeah, let me build on a little bit of what Chad said and actually what Becky just kind of brought us through. So my experiment was really around being a better active listener and asking more questions, particularly when I get stressed or when I feel pressure to get something done. And I've worked through a few of the experiments in my work life, and it's felt good, and I've felt like I've made progress. this absolutely translates to your home life as well. So I unfortunately had an experiment that didn't go quite as planned. And I'll set it up. I was actually flying up here to Minneapolis a couple of weeks ago, and I got the text from my wife mid-morning that said, hey, our youngest son's car won't start in the driveway. So I didn't have any openings in my calendar. I had to figure out, okay, how am I going to get home and try to get this car running before I have to go to the airport. So I was able to free up 30 minutes. I was going to race home. I was going to jumpstart this car. I was going to figure out what was going on. And as I came in hot, my wife was coming out the door trying to explain to me what she had already tried and what she had worked through already. And I was in this tunnel vision, not active listening, not asking good questions. And it absolutely blew up in my face. It was probably, and we don't have very many arguments, but it was probably me showing up at my worst because I wasn't thinking about active listening and asking her where she had been and what she had already done. It turned out that she had already tried the things that I was going to go and do, so it was completely ineffective. And worst of all, I stopped halfway through once I realized that I was being a complete jerk, and I had to race back to the office. And lo and behold, she got it running without me an hour later. So not only did I not solve the problem, I caused more grief on the home front. So sometimes you slip back into those old practices. But what I will tell you is I wasn't out of the driveway for 1 minute and I thought, you know what? I did not come in with an active listening mindset. I did not ask the right questions. So this experience maybe hasn't completely solved my challenges, but I am very aware very quickly of where I fall down. So again, it's an ongoing process and working on it every day.
I love that, Chip. And what I like about your story too is experiments aren't all supposed to be wonderful successes. If it truly is an experiment, there are going to be some that you're like, oh, well, good to know. Now we can move on and do something different. But I think many of us now, since this time, and I can say this for myself too, have tried things that just haven't worked well. And that's probably one of the most powerful aspects as well, is when it hasn't and you learn from it. So thank you for that, Chip. All right, John.
All right, yeah. So the thing I'm trying to work on, and my experiment is tied to it, is how do I make sure I'm always presenting with confidence? And a great example of this is in our monthly business review, where I'm representing all supply chain to the NAR leadership team. And so my experiment goes to how do I put together the messages that we present from a supply chain perspective in MDR, which typically come out of the supply review. So I would build them myself and then try to hit a deadline. And I'd go into the MDR and I'd always be a little bit nervous. Am I representing the way Becky would talk about this or Courtney would talk about something? And so in the January MDR, what I experimented with, and I didn't tell the leadership team I was doing this, but I actually brought the MDR key message draft into supply review. So we started the conversation as a leadership team and we had a great discussion. It led to another discussion. And we galvanized on those key messages. So we were all aligned on what those messages were going to be. Once we were all set on that, I actually sent them out, made sure everyone is aware of them. And I sent them to the DFO community as well. So I knew that when I walked in, the message I had was a supply chain message. And what it really did for me personally is it gave me a lot more confidence because I knew that Becky or Rob or Michael or Courtney, Katie, we're all going to say the same thing if they were in my chair. And it was super powerful for me personally, but it was even more powerful for us as a leadership team because I represent us in that forum and we show up better when I show up better. So for me, probably the big learning for me is you may look at that and say, well, that seems pretty obvious, but I've been trying to work on this for a very long time. And it was one small tweak in how I approached it that really, really has made a difference. And it's helped me become more confident. But again, I think really helped us as a leadership team show up differently.
Fantastic. Thank you, John. All right, Paul, you're going to be our closer today with 2 minutes left. So after hearing all of this and your own experiences going through this team development, how do you see this impacting our supply chain of the future? and specifically the role that this team, this leading edge team, can play.
Yeah, thanks, Hillary, and thanks team for sharing as well. It's a good reminder on the progress that we're making as a collective. So, Alison kind of intimated to you in that we think there's enormous value here. So we just don't want to keep that within our team, my team. We want to expand that out, especially to this team. So more to come in that space. I think that the reality is that obviously we still have a lot of work to do as a team as well. As Michael said, we want to be transformational, but we know that that doesn't come easy and it will take time. So this is truly part of our learning culture and what we want to enable. And we know as well, back to Alison's analogy of being on the bicycle and having momentum, we do have momentum, but we're also going to hit a few speed bumps. And hitting those speed bumps will really bring us even closer as a team. And we're going to have to try and navigate that with the grace and sophistication that it deserves, but knowing as well that we will bump up to each other, which is always going to happen in a matrix organization. And that's going to be part of our development as well. But I really thank the team for sharing, for being vulnerable as well. Please feel free to reach out to your leaders to find more. And more to come in this space. Exciting for us. I think it's making us better as a team. I know it's making me better as a leader. And I think it will help us to not just deliver what we can from a supply chain perspective, but actually fundamentally change what we deliver for General Mills as well. So thank you, team, for everybody that's involved on the journey, and look forward to seeing what happens in the years to come in that space.